All right, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Bracha Kodash. It's like your double honors to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone, who rule very beautifully. Double salutations be unto the Akim out here pushing this gospel and truth in this sincerity to the best of their ability given to them by Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai. Peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad. May the election of Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Lord willing, fall upon your houses. This is the brother Quana Wath. Come back at you, Lord will, with the edifying lesson through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Lord will. It is edifying, Lord will. It is straight to the point. And I woke up this morning, and it, ultimately came across, was looking at the news, whatnot, came across one of these, this article, as you see right here on the People's Voice.tv, and I seen this, right, as it says Cardi B says she'd rather live under Sharia law in Saudi Arabia than return to ghetto America, and I want to highlight first and foremost, right, people are starting to see, the decline, within America today. People are starting to see that America is ultimately, it's crashing. As the elder apostle Remlab had coined, a couple years ago, right? America is circling the drain, and he might have got that term, from, circling the drain from something else, but I can't remember. I just know, and remember, elder apostle Remlab, ultimately, making that connection. But nonetheless, right? America is circling the drain, right? Financially, economically, even, socially, right? Outside of America, right? Dealing with these other nations. We're seeing more conflict between America and its allies, right? Such as the EU nations, right? NATO, right? They're even making statements about, exiting NATO, which America is the founder of NATO. But nonetheless, right? We're seeing that decline, right? We're seeing a lot of these different nations, ultimately, they're starting to, slowly but surely step away from, the dollar, right, which is weakening the American economy, weakening the currency, and again, more and more people are starting to see that, and just the way that things are moving, as far as, Trump and this, administration, right, how they're treating the people and so on and so forth, right, you're starting to see a lot more people, right, especially celebrities, start to ultimately, point they're looking in a different direction as far as, the way they want their lives to run. And again, America is not, in that picture. America is not in their sights. So more and more celebrities are starting to move outside of America, which is ultimately prophecy, that people would leave America, that people would ultimately flee, and go to their own country or go to different countries, right, to ultimately, to live, But the main point I want to get out of this lesson, out of this article, is the fact that you have Cardi B, who is a known modern westernized woman, right? And everything that comes with it. The attitude, the 304-ness, so on and so forth, right? Hopping from rod to rod to rod. Hey, that's all modern Western society, mentality within these women. And again, Cardi B is, the I guess one of the poster childs or poster children, right, for that modern Western woman, lifestyle, and she's talking about going and just dwelling with, being in a country that enforces Sharia law, rather than staying here in America. And these modern women are not going to be able to handle that, right? These modern women are not going to be able to handle a country, right, that ultimately enforces Sharia law, and for those that don't know what Sharia law is, hey, we're going to ultimately get into that, and how these women, right, these modern women would ultimately crumble, right, under the Sharia law, right, which is usually, and mainly forced in these different, Muslim countries or Islamic countries, right? And I'm not going to get into this. I'll maybe read a little bit, right? It says, speaking from Saudi Arabia, where Sharia law governs daily life, Cardi B blasted the United States on social media, saying she hasn't seen a single bum overseas and declaring that Americans must convince her to return to what she derided as ghetto America, right? It says, I'm starting not to like America. Cardi B told her 164 million followers on a recent Instagram live video. It says, America made me pay taxes. The vice president talking shit about me on Twitter like I don't know. I don't feel I'm appreciated in America, you know? And really, you know, again, the modern woman just really ain't shit, right? Nobody truly appreciates the modern woman, because the modern woman, right, is just that, right? They're trash, you know? This is why, you know, Apostle Paul made the statement, right, that it would be better if we remain like he is, right? Not having a woman, not dealing with no woman, because again, the modern woman is just garbage, you know? You know, that applies more now than it did even in Apostle Paul's time, man, because these women now are just full of wickedness, man, you know, full of just straight up almost every woman that you see walking around is a 304. Right? Put that in the calculator and flip it upside down, man. You know? That's what these women are, man. They don't have no actual morals. They don't have no, you know, they're not Proverbs 31 woman, right? Which we're going to get into that chapter as well, man, because that's ultimately what, you know, would, you know, a woman being, you know, under Sharia law, it would force that woman, right, to follow that chapter, you know, and to be just that, right? Which most of these women aren't. Right? None of these women are Proverbs 31 or 2 Timothy 2 and 9 on down women. Right? None of them. You know? Again, they're all wicked out here, man. You know? Matter of fact, let's start there. Right? So Rock 25 and verse, 19? It says, right here, it says, all wickedness is but little to the wickedness of a woman, especially the modern Western woman, man. These women, you know, ultimately feel that they have some type of freedom, right? That they can go from rod to rod to rod, right? They feel that they can go from, you know, from man to man, or leave a man whenever they feel, oh, this is just not enough, right? I seen a video of a woman sat there and said that she left a man, you know, because he wasn't, you know, financially stable. But then turn around when the dude was asking her questions, you know, comes out he was financially stable. It just wasn't enough for her. Right, he wasn't making enough for her, right? But he was financially stable. But her main gripe was that he wasn't financially stable. So it's like these women don't know what the fuck they want, right? These women don't know, you know, truly what they want. They're just, women are, and the Elder Apostle Gabar has said it beautifully, right? These women are opportunists. You know, they're opportunists, right? When they ultimately see an opportunity, right, to have something better, they're going to take it, right? Not knowing that it is, or not caring, right, that it is wicked, that it is evil, and that'll ultimately, you know, get them judged by the Heavenly Father, Yahweh, through his only beloved begotten Son, Yahweh Shai. You know, women don't care, man, right? This is why ultimately a woman is supposed to be, you know, guided. A woman is supposed to be, you know, led, right, to make the right decision by her husband, you know, and if she's not married, by her father. You know, the woman is supposed to be under the subject, or the under subjection under a man, period, right? If she's not married, then it's her father. If she becomes married, then it's her husband, you know? But not these women out here, man, right? That whole feminist movement has destroyed the modern woman, man, right? It says all wickedness is but little to the wickedness of a woman. Let the portion of a sinner fall upon her, right? Because she's going to go from rod to rod and think nothing of it, right? What does it say? Quiver, right? In Sirach 26, verse 12. Ooh. Right. Oh, man. I mean, this is heavy. I mean, there's a lot in Sirach 26 and 25, right, are heavy chapters when dealing with, you know, the wickedness of woman. You know, it says, I'll drop down, man. Verse 9, Sirach 25 and Sirach 26 and verse 9. It says, the whoredom of a woman may be known in her haughty looks and eyelids, right? So you can see, right, you got these you know, these you know, prostitutes and, you know, these harlots and whatnot, right? You can tell that they're like that, man. you know, that's what they do, right? That's their job, that's their business. But see, you got women out here that walk around like this and tell you, oh, I'm not no hoe, oh, I'm not this, I'm not that. Yes, you are. You know, you could tell a man by his gait and his look and his walk, right? Just like you can tell a woman by how she dresses, right? Her haughtiness, you know, so on and so forth, man. You know, you could tell a hoe when you see one, man. You know, everyone can. Everyone can. You know, she's showing too much cleavage, man. You know, your fucking ass cheeks hanging out. You know, you can see her curves all defined and whatnot, man. That's a harlot right there, man. And that's majority of these women out here. You know, it says, verse 10, if thy daughter be shameless, keep her in straitly, lest she abuse herself through overmuch liberty, right? You're supposed to keep, you know, ultimately have watch over your daughter, man, right? You're supposed to have, you know, ultimately control, you know, of what your daughter is supposed to, you know, be doing and whatnot, right? And the elder apostles, if I'm not mistaken, I can't remember which elder apostle was. I just recently watched it, man, but, you know, nonetheless, right, that one of the elder apostles ultimately went in on how, you know, you're not supposed to allow your daughter, or you're supposed to marry off your daughter. A man is supposed to marry off his daughter. You know, a woman just can't go and pick her husband, right? According to, you know, ancient tradition, which is the way it's supposed to be in the first place, right? A man is supposed to marry off his daughter, right? But this society is completely different. You know, it says, watch over an impudent eye, and marvel not if she trespass against thee, right? It says she will open her mouth as a thirsty traveler when he hath found a fountain, and drink of every water near her. By every hedge will she sit down, and open her quiver, meaning her, you know, between her legs, against every arrow, which means a man's rod. So, you know, this is what the modern day woman is all about. You know, going from rod to rod to rod, you know, and so on, from man to man to man, right? Which is against the scriptures, man. Right? A woman is supposed to be with one man for her entire life. One man. Right? The very first man that ultimately pops her, you know, and you know, as they say, right, pops her cherry, that man is supposed to be with her. She's supposed to be with that man, right, for her entire life, right? Lest that man ultimately, you know, perish, you know, then she would be a widow and she would be allowed to marry, but nonetheless, right, she would have to stay with that man, right, for the remainder of her life. You know, that's how it's supposed to be, man. You know, that's how it's supposed to be. But again, these women out here, man, are they're out of order, and we understand that starts with, you know, this folly and wickedness that's being pushed, right? Sirach 10:2, right? As the you know, the judge is, so is, you know, his officers and those that dwell under him, roughly paraphrasing. So the reason why this is set up the way it is now is because it starts with Esau Edom, right? The wicked, right? Who's pushing what? Wickedness in the earth, you know? So this is a place of no proper order, no proper, you know, guidance, no proper judgment, right? The scriptures say that this is a place where wrong judgment proceedeth, man. You know, let's grab this though. This is Job 10 and verse 22. It says, a land of darkness, right? As darkness itself, and of the shadow of death without any order, and where the light is as darkness. So again, this is a place with no order, right? Place of wickedness, confusion, you know, because that's what that darkness is, right? It's confusion, it's wickedness, you know, that's what it is, you know. And all scriptures also say that folly is set in great dignity, right? So being retarded, doing stupid shit, being a mo, being a 304, all that is exalted here, man. Which is why, right, none of these modern Western women will be able to survive in a country, you know, that is that enforces Sharia law, right? You got Cardi B talking about it, but she would get eaten the fuck up. The way that she lives now, hell no, she would come running right back, you know, which I ultimately, you know, plug that into ChatGPT, right? How would the modern Western woman ultimately, you know, react or act, or, you know, how would they survive in a, you know, a country, right, that is, you know, that enforces, right, Sharia law, right? So I do want to grab it I asked ChatGPT, it says, with the way the modern Western woman has been raised and cultivated in society, how would these women react in countries that enforce Sharia law? And it says the short answer, right? Intense friction, rapid shock, and a fork in outcomes, right? Adaptation, resistance, or exit, right? It says the reasons sit at the collision point between social conditioning and legal reality. Because everything's completely different, right? Over here, a woman is able to do whatever the hell she wants, but yet over there, a woman has to, it's completely different, man. That's that Eastern culture. Now, we understand a lot of that, Muslim or Islamic culture, right, stems from, Israelite culture, right? They ultimately just put their own spin on it, whatnot, right? Their heathen spin on it, right? So there's still some things that have to be corrected, but hey, for the most part, right, Sharia law is very close, very close in certain aspects, right, when it comes to, how things are supposed to be ran, just like, again, right, a woman is not supposed to, ultimately, go out there and head the household and, take care of, the bills and whatnot, being made equal to a man. No, a woman has to, stay home. A woman is to take care of the home. A woman is to be a cook. A woman is to be, the raiser of the children. First and foremost, right? They're the first instructions, right, that the child gets is from the mom, from the mother. And obviously, as the child gets older, right, the father ultimately establishes that order and whatnot. But the mother is supposed to rule under the authority, right, of the father and the father's rules and the father's, commands. Right, which ultimately that father is supposed to operate out of, the scriptures, and how the scriptures ultimately tell you to raise, a child and whatnot, that's ultimately order. That's proper order, But again, as we read, right, this place is out of order. But I'll keep reading. It says, zoom out first, right? It says, modern Western woman isn't a single creature, but there are dominant cultural defaults produced by Western liberal societies, right? It's high emphasis on individual autonomy, right? They want to be able to do whatever they want, right? It says expressive identity, sexual self-determination, legal equality before the state, and the assumption that law protects personal choice rather than constrains it for moral ends. These aren't just beliefs, they're habits of mind reinforced from childhood through schools, media, law, and economics, mainly, right, through schools, media, and the lack of proper parenting. The scriptures say, right, to train up a child in the way that he should go, right? Proverbs 22:6. But see, again, most of these parents, right, are not properly training up their children, at all, right? A woman cannot raise a man, right? A woman cannot raise a boy, right, to be a man, right? She doesn't know what it's like to be a man, or the challenges and the, the mental fortitude that you have to have as a man, right, in order to be able to survive in this world. A woman can't teach that to a boy. Only a man can teach that to a boy, but see, again, right, this is why you have a lot of these effeminate men, weak men, right, because they were raised by women, they were raised by women, right, and they didn't have no male, guidance, which is why a lot of these, young niggas, right, the YNs, right, are shooting, right, instead of fighting, right? You have an issue, man, I'd rather you just fucking fight. But before that, be a man, talk it out, right? Figure out your issues, what it is, talk like a man. You ain't got to be so damn emotional, man, But nonetheless, this is the way the society is, and women are the one that are fueling that, by not wanting to be with the man. Oh, I can, I don't need a man. I don't need this, that, and the third. You going into a country that, enforces Sharia law, it's going to force you, to be with a man, right? As we read, it says, now drop that person into a country enforcing Sharia law, not the symbolic version, but the lived legal social system. Sharia, when enforced by the state, prioritize communal morality, meaning you're not able to just go out there and do some shit because you're going to make the community look bad. It says religious duty and prescribed gender roles over individual preference. So you're going to have to actually play your role, right? You can't just go out here and I'm gonna wear the pants. No, you ain't. You a woman, be a woman, right? It says law is not neutral, it is explicitly moral and theological. Right? It says the reaction tends to unfold in stages, right? First comes cognitive shock. Many Western assumptions quietly assumed to be human rights are suddenly treated as negotiable, conditional, or forbidden, right? Meaning that these things that you think, right, or it's my human right to do this, or to vote, or, you know, as a woman, it's my human right to, you know, to have AB abortions, and, you know, so on and so forth, right? All that shit. It's my human rights, my basic human right. Well, guess what? Nah. In other countries, those things that are considered here in America, here in the West, right, considered human rights, those things become, you know, something that can be thrown away. You know, you thinking that you have to have them, but in other countries, they're not gonna have that option. You know, it says, right? It says, let me get back to it. Right? It says, first comes cognitive shock. Many Western assumptions quietly assumed to be human rights are suddenly treated as negotiable, conditional, or forbidden. Dress codes, gender segregation, male guardianship, speech limits, sexual conduct laws, these aren't social norms you can ignore, right? So you have to operate by these things, man. Otherwise, what? Right? They're in different countries, right? You can ultimately be put to death, you know, by doing certain things, man. Right? A woman ultimately assaulting a man in public, you know, or you know, like you see a lot of these fucking so-called black women doing, man. They'll hit their man, this and that. Especially, you know, you got the so-called Latinas, the so-called blacks, you know. They'll just outright, you know, start attacking their man, mistreating their man, you know. Ain't none of that shit is accepted, you know, in these other countries, man, that enforce, you know, none of these Muslim countries, you know. None of that shit is accepted, man. You acting, you being all loud, this and the third. There was just a recent case, I want to say maybe a few months back, of a so-called black woman, right, going to a so-called Muslim country, you know, an Arab country, and ultimately being arrested, you know. Because you can't act like that over there, man. They'll fucking put your ass in jail, or they'll fucking kill you. You know, if the situation is bad enough. You know, none of you fucking women are gonna be able to fucking goddamn survive over there, man. Right? It says, they are enforced rules with consequences. The shock isn't just restriction, it's discovering that moral authority comes from God as interpreted by the state, not from individual consequences or consent, right? You know, you're going to have to actually start, you know, following the laws, man. Right? You're going to be forced, right, to follow, you know, the laws, you know, that are being pushed, right? Rather than trying to bend or break them or trying to bribe your way out of it. That shit ain't gonna work for you, you know? Like a lot of these women, man, they just open up their legs, and, you know, men being simps, you know, over here in the West, right, they ultimately fall for it, man. Even in the legal system, man. Over there, a woman come a dime a dozen, man. You know, they ain't worried about it. The man rules, right, which is the way it's supposed to be, right? Let's bring that out, right? The woman is supposed to be under the man, right? It's 1 Corinthians 11:1. And it's Apostle Paul, right? It says, be ye followers of me, even as I also am of Hamashiach, right? Because Yahushua, he was the word made flesh, right? So you best believe he was keeping every single law, statute, command. He was perfect, right? Yahushua was perfect. He never broke a law. He never sinned, right? When he was here in the flesh, right? So you best believe this right here. If he, you know, if he was to be in that situation, right? If Yahushua was to have a man, a woman, right? He would be, you know, him being the man, he would be over that woman, you know. You know, now Yahushua didn't have a woman, right? Because it wasn't for him in that time, you know, to have a woman, right? He had a woman, he had many women when he was Solomon, you know, if you can receive it, right? But at that time, it wasn't for him to have a woman, you know, but nonetheless, right? He was perfect, right? So if he did have a woman, right, you best believe that this right here, this order that we're about to read, will be established, you know. Verse 2, it says, now I praise you, brethren, that ye remember me in all things and keep the ordinances as I deliver them to you, right? Which he got from Yahushua himself, you know, which means it's coming from the Heavenly Father. So this is the heavenly order, right? Verse 3, it says, but I would have you know that The head of every man is Hamashiach, right? Yahweh Shai, right? And the head of every woman is the man, right? It says, and the head of Hamashiach is the Most High. So it goes the Most High, Yahweh Shai, man, and then woman. That's the order. That's how it's supposed to be. You know, that's how it's supposed to be. Now, again, over here, right? And even over in a lot of these so-called Muslim countries in certain instances, you know, and even other countries, right? The woman, you know, tends to get a little bit more leeway. And, you know, because we're in a world ruled by wickedness, you know? So, of course, you have that because the scriptures talk about that. Every nation have drunken of that wine, right? That Western, you know, philosophy, that Western lifestyle, you know, all these nations have drunken of that wine, man. So again, you're going to have that in all the countries, but you still have countries that still enforce that, you know, majorly, right? And you're starting to have more countries starting to push back against this Western lifestyle, man. You know, you have more and more countries that are pushing back against that shit, man. You know, now that they're, you know, you know, the Lord Yahweh Shem Shah is revealing, you know, who the wicked is, right? And his agendas and so on and so forth. You got more countries that are pushing back. But nonetheless, right, you're still going to find that wicked shit in these other countries as well, because we're still in a wicked world. Now, all that shit will be completely eradicated, you know, once Yahweh Shai comes and, you know, establishes the kingdom, you know, here on earth, right? Because there's not going to be no wickedness being done, you know? And if there is, it's going to be punishable by death, you know? Immediately, you know. And again, it's only going to be done by these other nations, because you're going to have the law, statutes, commandments written in, you know, in our minds. We're going to be perfect. We'll never go off, but the other nations are not going to be perfect. So again, we're going to have to chastise them, you know, get consequences and whatnot for their actions. But any wickedness that's done is punishable by death, you know. Obviously, you know, we're going to be operating, you know, in order and whatnot, but, you know, if what they did was, you know, punishable by death, then guess what? They're going to be put to death, man. You know? But this is the order. Slack, yeah. Slack. You know, but this is the order that we are to follow. You know, so let's go back. Right? It says, then comes emotional response, right? It says, which varies sharply by personality. Some experience anger and moral outrage. The system feels illegitimate, oppressive, and infantilizing. This reaction is strongest among women raised to see resistance as a virtue and self-expression as non-negotiable, which is 99.999% of these women out here, especially the so-called black woman. You know? It says this reaction is strongest among, It says others feel fear and hypervigilance. Even those willing to comply outwardly often experience chronic stress from the need to self-monitor behavior, speech, posture, and association. A smaller subset adapts pragmatically, meaning little by little. It says they compartmentalize, internal beliefs remain Western, external behaviors conforms, right? This is survival psychology, not ideological conversion, right? So they never really feel, you know, that what they're following or the country that they're a part of now is something that they would, you know, truly believe in, but yet they're going to do it anyways, you know? So they're not necessarily fully converting, you know? But they're just again, following it in order to survive, you know? Which you might have some that do that, you know? You might have some that are you know, that are ultimately capable of doing that, but majority of these women out here are not going to be able to conform, you know? Externally, you know, or even especially internally, but externally they might not be able to do that, you know. It says actual acceptance is rare and usually requires either prior religious alignment or deliberate rejection of Western feminist premises, which this is, man, as it says, rare. You know, you have, you know, some women in this ministry, in this truth, not in the ministry, but in the truth, right, that understand that, you know, that agree with, you know, and truly believe in Yahweh Shem Shah. Of course, right, they're going to have to, you know, rethink, right, that Western mindset. But that's extremely rare. Extremely fucking rare, man. You know? So this almost doesn't apply to almost any Western woman, man. Even those within the truth, man. You still got a lot of women that know they're Israelites, that trust and believe in Yahweh Shemel Shai and still acting out of order. You know? Because again, right, we're in Babylon, right? So that Babylon mindset is ultimately permeated, right? And damn near permanently stained, you know, our women, you know? It says, but this frame, it says when acceptance happens, it's often framed as structure, clarity, or protection. But this framing only works if the person already distrusts Western individualism or seeks external imposed order. It says what does not typically happen is seamless integration. That does not happen, right? Western upbringings trains people to negotiate rules, push boundaries, and appeal to abstract rights. Sharia-based systems are not designed for negotiable or negotiation by individuals, especially women. The mismatch is structural and not attitudinal, right? And you know, really that's what I want to. Actually, no, we'll drop down to the last two. That's kind of the point, right? It says, so the honest answer is most modern women would experience Sharia enforcement as a loss of agency so severe it feels existential. Some would adapt quietly, some would rebel internally or externally. Most would leave if they could. Few would thrive without a fundamental reworking of their framework, you know? So ultimately, again, right, but these women out here, they wouldn't be able to survive. Most of these women are not going to be able to even externally adapt, right? They're going to feel oppressed. They're going to feel, you know, controlled, you know? They wouldn't survive in this world, man, you know? They wouldn't survive and you see this, a lot of these things that we read, right, is going to be enforced in the kingdom, man, right? You women acting the way you're acting now, that shit's going to be eradicated, right? We're going to have, you know, you women are going to have to follow, you know, Proverbs 31, right? 2 Timothy 2:9. You know, matter of fact, let's grab that. You know, this is how you women are supposed to be acting, you know, versus how you're acting now, which is why you wouldn't survive, right? This is what was that, 2 Timothy's 2:9. Oh, it's 1 Timothy's 2:9. Come on, this is 1 Timothy's 2:9. It says, in like manner also, that women adorn themselves in modest apparel, right? So you got to dress modestly, man, right? Which that would be enforced in a Sharia law, you know, country, right? You can't be out here just showing, you know, your body, you know, to everybody, right? Got your ass cheeks hanging out, titties hanging out. That shit is forbidden. That shit is forbidden in a country that enforces Sharia law, right? That's forbidden in a lot of these Muslim countries, man. That might even be, you know, sort of laxed on their the Sharia law enforcement, right? They might even be, you know, laxed on certain things, right? Like allowing women to vote or allowing women to go to school, this and the third. But a woman going over there and dressing in, you know, unmodest apparel, that shit's not gonna happen, man. You know, let alone in the kingdom of Yahweh B'Shem Yahushua, that's not gonna happen at all, ever. Not even in thought. You know, that'll never happen, right? As you see right here, even Cardi B was dressing up covered, right? Let's see. She was dressing up covered, right? She's still showing her curves and whatnot, but she understand, right? When you go into a Sharia law country, you're gonna have to cover up. You know? It says in like manner also that women adorn themselves in modest apparel with shamefacedness, right? Not being outgoing, right? Not being, you know what I mean? Everybody, you know, you talking to everybody and, you know, just being best friends with everybody. No, that shit ain't gonna happen, man. You know? It says with shamefacedness and sobriety, not with broidered hair or gold or pearls or costly array, right? Not, you know what I mean? Just putting on, you know, the dress and you know what I mean? Got gold in your hair, all the little tinklets and whatnot, you know, acting like, you know, you modest or you some type of value, but actually being that, right? It says what? It says, but which becometh women professing godliness with good works, right? So you actually have to apply these things, man. You have to actually be that woman. Right? You can't just make it look on the outside like Cardi B doing, you know, making it look like you ready to, you know, submit to a man, or making it look like you ready to, you know, be this man's, you know, comfort, you know, but actually being that, right? With good works. Good works is what? Following the scriptures, man, right? It says, let the woman learn in silence with all subjection, right? Subjection unto who? Their husbands, right? You got to be subject unto your husband, as the scriptures say, right? You know, it says, but I suffer not a woman to teach, nor usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence, right? You can't tell a man what to do. You know, where are you going? Why are you going here? You can't do that. You can't do this. None of that shit. That shit will not fly. None of that shit. It's not going to fly in Sharia law country, and it's definitely, absolutely not going to fly in the kingdom of Yahweh Shem Yahushai. So true that it rhymed. You know, you want to always telling me, if it's true, it'll rhyme. You know, right? It says, for Adam was first formed, then Eve. It says, Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in transgression. Notwithstanding, she shall be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith and charity and holiness and sobriety, right? So you women, right, are going to be delivered to bring to what? To ultimately carry the seed of the men and bring back the nation of Israel, right? 2/3 of our people have to be brought back, and they're going to be brought back, right, through the loins, right, of the elect. The man planting the seed in that woman and bringing back the elect. You know, that's why you women will ultimately be delivered. You know, so that you can help, right, bring back, right, the 2/3, you know, of the nation of Israel. You know. But this is the first portion, right? This deals with your characteristics, right? This deals with your characteristics, right? How you're supposed to be, right? Being shamefaced, sober, chaste, right? Scriptures talk about a woman being chaste as well, right? Discreet, you know, not going and telling everybody their business, you know. That's how a woman is not supposed to be, right? So let's jump to Proverbs 31. Right, which goes into what a woman is supposed to be doing when, you know, as far as their the occupation, if you will. Right, it's Proverbs 31, and I'll start at verse 10. Right, Proverbs 31 verse 10. It says, "Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies." Right. Let's look at that word virtuous. Give me 1 second. All right, it's virtuous. Virtuous, right? It says characterized by vigor or strength, having qualities befitting a knight, valiant, right? Hardy, courageous, right? Of good quality. It says righteous, potent, of good quality. A good quality woman, right? Right here, right? Having excellent moral qualities, conforming to religious law, right? A woman who's ultimately going to be following the scriptures, right? And doing what she's supposed to do, right? It says, who can find a virtuous woman? For her price, meaning her value, is far above rubies, right? Which are a very, very, you know, valuable stone, right? It says, the heart of her husband doth safely trust in her, so that she shall have no need of spoil, right? She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. Which, hey man, you ain't gonna find that in these modern women, man. You know, you got women that'll you know, ultimately lay down with a man and, you know, have children with that man, but then turn around and try to get that man set up, you know, turn around and you know, make it to where, you know, that man now has to go and pay child support. He's not able to see his children, right? He just goes and you know, is basically screwed, man, right? Which, again, going back to the original point, you know, that this is why Apostle Paul said that he would rather men, right, us men, be like him, not dealing with women, man. You know, it says, because these women are evil, right? It says, but this is talking about, again, a virtuous woman, right? Which is what we're going to find in the script. You know, when we get into to the kingdom, we're going to have virtuous women, man. These women, our women are going to be perfect. Right? They're not going to be like these modern day women, man. Or even these women, right, that are over there in these Muslim countries, man. You know, that ultimately have, you know, that still push Sharia law, because you still got wickedness in these countries. You know, the law, statutes, commandments are not being pushed, you know, in these different, you know, Muslim countries and whatnot. You know, I just ultimately want to bring out the fact that even with their laws, the modern woman still can't, you know, keep up, right? The modern woman still won't be able to survive in that, let alone the scriptures, let alone in the kingdom, man, where perfection is going to be enforced. You know, you know. But I'll keep going. Verse 13. I don't want to make this too long. We're already at 40 minutes, right? It says, she seeketh wool and flax and worketh willingly with her hands. So you got the Proverbs 31 woman, right? Which is what we're going to be, again, how a woman is supposed to be in the first place. This is the kind of woman you're going to find in the kingdom. These modern women, they work with their hands. They knead bread and so on and so forth. They stitch up, blankets, clothing, so on and so forth. Which a lot of the women outside of the West, right? They do those things. They do those things, right? They don't have a choice. They don't have the Western luxuries, right? So they're not able to operate in that same threshold or that same mindset, right? They have to actually do these things, work with their hands. Modern women don't know shit, barely know how to cook, It says, she is like the merchant ships, she bringeth her food from afar. She riseth also while it is yet night, and giveth meat to her household, and a portion to her maidens. Meaning you gonna wake the hell up, man, and you finna, go and cook a meal, and everybody gonna wake up to that good smell, food and whatnot. In the ancient times, right, the man might have, ultimately caught a, couple fish or whatnot, you know what I mean? And y'all might have had a couple fish that night, you know what I mean? And now you got some vegetables, pull some stuff from the garden or whatnot, And now in the morning you making them, right? You making all that. You putting that all together, right? So everybody can wake up and have good breakfast, have good, food and whatnot, be able to start the day off right, Shit, most of these fucking women, man, they'll like, nah, no, I'll go to Starbucks, I'll go to, Dutch Bros, I'll go to, Dunkin' Donuts, or, what I mean, and rather McDonald's and get their breakfast and Burger King. So, man, fuck all that shit, man. That's why everybody's so goddamn fucking fat. Nobody wants to eat healthy. Nobody wants to take the time to actually make their food. Everybody's fucking lazy. That's the Western mindset, man. That's that Western fucking mindset. You don't have women that do this, man. This is you find a woman that does this, an anomaly. She's an anomaly, man. Look up that word. She's an anomaly. Which is why the scriptures say, who can find a virtuous woman? We just read it, right? Verse 10, who can find a virtuous woman, for her price is far above rubies. That's a valuable woman right there, man. One that actually is, to the best of her ability, following these scriptures. That's a good woman right there, man. But again, we're almost never gonna find that's a needle in a haystack, man. Slut, right? It says, she considereth a field and buyeth it. With the fruit of her hand she planteth a vineyard, right? She gardens, right? She girdeth her loins with strength and strengtheneth her arms. She perceiveth that her merchandise is good. Her candle goeth not out by night. Right? She layeth her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. Right? I mean, she's gonna stitch, she's gonna sew, she's gonna crochet, all the different forms, right? And I'm not gonna read all this. Dropping down verse 24, it says, she maketh fine linen and selleth it, and delivereth girdles unto the merchant. It says, strength and honor are her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come. It says, she openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. And man, these women out here are fucking evil, man. These women are dumb as shit, evil as shit. What did the King Solomon say? Out of 1,000 women, he found none. These women out here are fucking vain, man. Vain as fuck. Verse 27, she looketh well to the ways of her household, right? Meaning she's not out here just worried about her damn self. She's worried about how her house, is being upheld, being upkept, right? How her house, ultimately look, how her husband looks, how her her household looks, Not being selfish, man. Which is all these damn women out here. They want to look good, but their house is looking trash. Garbage everywhere. They don't cook, they don't clean, they leave the kitchen all fucking dirty as shit. That's majority of these women out here, man. The women ain't shit, for real, man. You know? It says, her children arise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praiseth her. So, I mean, this is what you're not going to get, right? And you can go through the whole, from 10 all the way down, man. It's a beautiful, gives you a beautiful description, if you will, or depiction of what a woman is supposed to be like. How she's supposed to, ultimately move and whatnot, within the world. Going back to, 1 Timothy 2:9, right? It gives you the characteristics that woman is supposed to, uphold within herself, which again, you don't see none of these within the modern woman, man, which is exactly why none of these women are going to be able to survive going into a country that enforces Sharia law, let alone make it into the kingdom of Yahweh B'Shem El Shai. This is why a lot of these women are going to have to fucking perish, man, and die, Now I got a few more precepts, man, and we'll close out. But this is Isaiah 32 and verse 9. It says, rise up, ye women that are at ease. And most of these modern women, man, they're at ease. They think they good. They think they smooth, right? They got it made, But soon Yahweh B'Shem El Shai is going to turn that world upside down, right? It says, rise up, ye women that are at ease. Hear my voice, ye careless daughters. Give ear unto my speech. Many days and years shall ye be troubled, ye careless women. For the vintage shall fail and the gathering shall not come, right? And we're at that point where, prices are going up, right? Supplies are going down, countries are ditching the dollar, which means a hyperinflation is soon to come. 2026 is going to be a very, very, very bad year, right? Especially for, the average American, man. It's going to be a very, very, very bad year. Lord will, all hell breaks loose, man, but it very well could. Right? It could really honestly break out at any moment, man. The times that we're in, it can happen at any time, man. Right? No man knows the day nor hour, not even Yahweh Shai. We just know that it's coming. We have all the different signs. And we've been telling y'all for years, starting with the elder apostles, right? For decades. Elder bishops for decades, right? Some elders for decades. Or approaching 2 decades, Come on, man. We've been telling y'all for years, man, to get right with Yahweh B'Shem El Shai, your power, right, before it's too late, man. Right? Verse 11, it says, tremble ye women that are at ease, be troubled, ye careless ones, strip you and make you bare and gird sackcloth upon your loins, right? So either listen, and repent or die. And that's just as simple as that, But this lesson already going, pretty long, man. I just, already made the point. I was just kind of flowing in the spirit, and ultimately wanted to, bring that out. The modern woman will never be able to survive in a country, that enforces, Sharia law, right? Because these women are too comfortable with the, the luxury that they do have here in America, being able to, act autonomously and do whatever the fuck they want, be however they want, mistreat people however they want, disrespect themselves, right? However they want. That shit ain't gonna fly, man. In these so-called Muslim countries, man. And those women are definitely not going to make it into the kingdom of Yahweh B'Shem El Shai. But with that, Lord wills, at a final Lord will, straight to the point, I'm going to give all praise, honor, glory to Yahweh B'Hashem, Yahweh Shai, B'Hashem, Rechak, Quadash, double honors to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone. Till next time, I say shalom.